So we're going to welcome our wonderful guest. Reverend Jessica Hebert is known and regarded for her gentleness, delicate way with words, and humor. Through intuitive and spiritual services, she provides support, tools, and resources to harmonize your sacred wholeness, instilling calm, clarity, and hope. A core aspect of Jess's work is training and empowering light workers, shamans, and healers. She teaches a variety of classes and courses about the workings of the universe, understanding our mystical experiences, fifth dimensional approaches to life's challenges, and tapping into the healer within. So she'll soon release her first book, A Guide for the Budding Shaman, which I've been reading and I really enjoy it. And in that book, she draws on her decade of wisdom as a shaman and interfaith minister, as well as her 2 decades as a practicing pagan. Jessica walks through life consistently connected with the divine and the physical dimensions of Earth. She strives to serve the divine with balanced tolerance, generosity, charity, mercy, compassion, and an appreciation for humor. She sees the spiritual in all of life, from doing dishes to lighting prayer candles. Reverend Jessica draws on 2 decades of pagan practice and self-healing initiations. In the past 10 plus years, she's trained in practice in shamanism, Reiki, dream interpretation, interfaith ministry, and priestesshood. And so Jessica serves clients all over the world, and she offers remote sessions that include Reiki healing, intuitive phone readings, remote energy clearings, and dream interpretation. And her virtual classes include a healer course and an Explore Shamanism course. And Jessica also offers rites of passage ceremonies, such as baptisms or wickenings, coming of age ceremonies, custom weddings, and end-of-life ceremonies. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you for inviting me.
I'm glad that you can, I know you're raising kids as well as working several jobs and being the energy worker and shaman. I'm just curious to know, I was interested in paganism for a while, and I've always felt drawn to Celtic paganism. I know you have a rather astounding lineage in terms of the English side of the family, going all the way back to the Plantagenets. But how did you get into Wiccan studies or paganism in general?
All right, so I grew up in a very small Christian town, and then I went to college and I met a bunch of shiny, happy pagans, some of them just by chance. And it really resonated with me. And so that's kind of how I started to get into it.
So what drew you in? Their connection to nature, or their belief in natural healing or energy healing? Or
to be honest, I think it was their interest in developing their intuition and having their own personal spiritual connection to the great at all. They didn't really rely on like a priest or whatever to tell them, what the universal structure is supposed to be like. And instead, they were open to experiencing the energies and whatnot of the universe themselves. And so that kind of appealed to me. And I didn't grow up psychic, but it was something I always kind of wanted to be. And so, it was kind of an interesting way to get into the Celtic paganism, but here I am.
And I mean, some of this I think is in your lineage. Do you get the feeling sometimes that your ancestors drew you in? I don't believe in accidents.
Oh, yes.
I think you met the pagans you met in college for a good reason.
Oh, yes, definitely. I'm sure I've known them for lots of lifetimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, now let's just look at the shamanism for a moment, because what I thought was cool is in the book, you talk about how it's really international. I tend to think of shamanism in terms of, and you mentioned this, indigenous North American and indigenous South American medicine people, basically, and people who kind of walk between worlds and connect those worlds. And you point out the shamans have been present in almost all societies around the world. And,
Oh, yes.
they can be called to connect with a variety of flavors based on their location, ancestry, past lives, etc. And you point out sometimes we're drawn to beliefs and practices that are familiar to us from lives we've had before, which I love. But in addition to the indigenous North American and South American variety of shamanism, there's Siberian, which is where the word shaman comes from, you point out. There's Aboriginal Australian. There's the Celtic, pagan, Wiccan aspect. There's the Norse shamanism. There's Egyptian Hermetic, Greek and Roman, African, Jewish shamanism, Christian, which I hadn't even known about, Sufi, Hindu, Buddhist, and Tibetan, Roma, and then Galactic Shamanism. Now, do you yourself feel to fall in with the Galactic Shamanism crowd?
I do. I feel like I kind of fall in with a mix of things, but I feel that most strongly I fall in with like the Galactic and the Celtic and Druidic shamanism.
I've always been pulled to the Druidic and the Celtic, and I never wanted to get too much into Wicca because I felt I would be tempted into what you warn against in the book, which is don't put spells on yourself or other people. And when I lived in California, I met so many people who were into this, who were into what they felt was a natural, nature-based religion or spiritual form of growth, which is fine. But if you're not careful, if you're immature about it, you can get into that sort of manipulation. Have you had classes where people ask about that, or what do you teach people on that front?
Well, I try to instill that it's really important to keep our intentions pure.
Yeah.
So whether we're, casting a spell on a thing or a place, it's, good to be pure in our intentions and our work. And people do ask, well, why can't I cast, on myself? Or what if they're attacking me? Why can't I cast a binding spell?
Yeah.
And it's just, there's this thing called universal law. And it kind of allows, for individuals to have a right to their autonomy.
Yes. So actually you are granting yourself and others their full sovereignty by not trying to manipulate. Yeah, that's an excellent point. And then in the book, you also point out that shamans have different titles like priest or priestess, witch or wizard, alchemist. I've always been drawn to alchemy. Medicine person, mystic, Magdalena, wise woman or wise man, nun or monk, a holy person, a healer, a seer, a psychic, intuitive, medium, channeler, or an edge walker. That is fascinating to me. Is that a particular whole tradition, edge walker? Or is that just another name?
It's just another name. Yeah. I have found that for some people, they just don't think of themselves as being, shamans, because we do think of them as being like the indigenous Americas and so on. And so a lot of people do walk the way of the shaman, but often think of ourselves by different titles or descriptions. And so with the phrase edgewalker, it kind of emphasizes, the one foot in the physical and the other foot in the spiritual.
Well, you yourself tell the story that you decided to take a shaman and intuitive development class at one point, and you're saying it was one of those things in my path that was meant to be, and you received a belated birthday present on the day that the class started. So tell us about that.
All right. So my birthday is in April, and I was following this page on Facebook about Irish archaeology and indicated that I liked this pendant for sale from that organization. And well, unbeknownst to me, my sister ordered it for me, but it came over a month late, and it was a druid tree on a pewter pendant, and it just happened to arrive the first day of that class. And so I wore that pendant to my first shaman class. Okay. And in that class, we happened to talk about the topic of what kind of shaman are you? And I just thought of that pendant, which I was just then wearing for the first time is like, okay, definitely, a druidic shaman.
I absolutely love that. Do you ever get past life memories
I do, yes.
of doing ritual, ceremony? What are the memories?
Okay, so symbols are interesting because they can sometimes be tied to our present as well as our past identities. And so in college, when I first decided to dedicate myself as a pagan, I went out and bought myself my first pentacle. And I, brought it back to my dorm room, and I was so excited, and I turned on some Celtic-ish music and was sitting there with my pentacle. And then I had a little past life memory of the burning times.
Oh, wow.
Yes, so that was pretty powerful, but I have been healing from that, and I think I have moved on from that bitterness.
Yes. Were you imprisoned or were you executed in that life? Or both?
Executed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I certainly had a few lives where I didn't make it out of a prison, let's just say. Bad things can happen there. I feel like so many people have come back at this time who were persecuted for their beliefs or their practices or their healing capability or their visionary capability. They've come back at this time to share those gifts and also to heal that trauma. Do you get that feeling?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I feel like for some of us, some of those traumas that we're carrying are kind of final threads tying us to like the third dimensional life. And as we evolve into like fifth dimensional and higher being, it is time for us to heal and shed those ties.
Yeah, that's well said. It's true because we can kind of unconsciously identify with being the one who suffers, being the one who's locked out, who isn't understood or appreciated. And
or being the one who's persecuted.
Yes, exactly. I'm the persecuted one. And that becomes part of our identity. And we weave that, unconsciously kind of weave that into the fact that we've got certain gifts. If you see somebody doing that, what would you say to them if they came to you and said, I don't know, I seem to be stuck on this point?
That's a good question. I guess we would kind of go into like a reading or Reiki and look at, those areas that are kind of surfacing for healing and then follow it to the root.
Yes.
And then work on healing it at the root.
Yeah, excellent. So you don't just sort of take an overriding principle and say, well, you can't do that. You've got to straighten up. You're a shaman. You got into the healing process. That is fantastic. And you mentioned in your book the 5 tenets of shamanism: compassion, tolerance, mercy, generosity, and charity. Where does mercy come in? The others I follow, but where's mercy? Why is that important?
So mercy comes in as we're trying to operate, in a heart-centered manner, but encountering people and behaviors that aren't so heart-centered. So for some people, it's really easy to get pulled into a cycle of like tit for tat, the revenge and things like that. And so that's where mercy comes in. It's kind of the precursor to justice.
Yeah, very beautiful. Not handing out retribution.
I feel compassion is kind of more related to like empathy and kind of acknowledging that, a person, is where they're at for whatever reasons, whereas the mercy part is a little more in the actions that we choose to take regarding these actions that may have been done towards us and so on.
Coming to a place of justice, higher justice, or divine justice. Yeah, beautiful. I just want to ask Jess also, in the book you say that through science and spiritual teachers, we know that energy is neither created nor destroyed. It is just changed, which has been my feeling as well. And when we say everything is energy, you write everything includes thoughts, souls, emotions, numbers, objects, words, intentions, and so on. How would you convince somebody I go through this a lot, that their words, as they describe their situation, it's one thing to say, I've been feeling this way lately. But it's another thing to say, my future is so dark, or I have no hope, or that nothing's going to change. I try to explain to people when they send me emails like that, please don't describe your experience, including what's going to happen in the future, in such dark terms, because our words are so powerful. Even the objects in our homes, people will have objects that pull their energy down or remind them of a painful past, and they're not even thinking of it. What would you say to somebody who they can't quite grasp that? People have unconscious processes that they live in. And,
Yes,
it's a habit to think negatively.
it is. Yes.
Yeah. So then their energy is determined by those words, and maybe by the fact they wear black all the time, trying to be really chic or creative. I just have a hard time sometimes trying to lift people out of their preference for, like what you were saying earlier. We get into patterns where we see ourselves as the persecuted or the sufferer, and we don't see a way out, and our words are fighting. Even while we would like to come out of that, our words are fighting us on that, because they hold a very dark energy.
They do, yes. And so even if we're trying to do our work to raise our frequency, as long as we're using those, words that have the lower resonance, that's still going to affect our own frequency, because that's scientifically energy works when you have different frequencies interacting with each other. They can kind of balance each other out or change or shift each other. And so it's that way spiritually as well.
Yeah. And numbers holding energy. Are you interested in numerology at all? Have you looked at that? I haven't learned very much about that, but we've got...
Oh, yes. I work a lot with numbers and dream interpretation. And the fun thing about dream interpretation is you can apply that to waking life as well. Okay. Because all those symbols, they just are.
So we see symbols as we go through our day, just like when we have a dream, and those symbols might have real meaning for us?
For sure.
Yeah. So when you do dream interpretation, are you relying on your own intuition there to connect with what's important in that person's dream for them?
I kind of use a mix of things. So I have this really good book called The Encyclopedia of Dreams, Symbols and Interpretations by Rosemary Ellen Geely. And so as I'm combing through the dream, I'm pulling out the different symbols and kind of looking at it as translating it.
Yeah.
And then the intuition comes in with stringing it all back together. So it's kind of an alchemical process. You get the dream, laid out, and then you pick out the symbols, and then you kind of shift, okay, this means that means that, and then you string it all back together, and it kind of means something new and different.
Yeah, I really like that idea. I've never had a dream interpretation session. I find when I write down my dreams, sometimes the answer will come to me. I had a really bizarre, I haven't done this with this dream, but I had a really bizarre, desperately annoying dream the other night, a couple nights ago, that I had parked my car in a big city, a big downtown area like LA, but I forgot which parking garage I had put it in, or which part of which parking garage. I was just so lost. And I kept bumping into people I know, and I kept saying, oh, I can't remember where I parked my car, it's so awful. And they laughed. They just chuckled at this and took it really lightly. I was so amazed and annoyed. And I woke up feeling like, oh my gosh, I hope that never happens. That's so awful. And a couple of times I've been in a mall parking lot, say for instance, and parked the car and then come out and been like, okay, which row was it? But I have a general idea. This was just dreadful. And I thought to myself, well, are you changing something in your life? That's what came up. That so I made a change.
Yes. And what are you waiting for to change it?
Yeah, wow. Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah, trying to find, the path to get to that point or change, and the how. And
oh, I have the I'm lost in an office building or hotel dream also. Don't know which elevator. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, buildings in general represent our psyche.
Wow.
And so apartments are parts of ourself.
Yeah.
And if it's like a shopping mall or a store, it's places we go to find spiritual nourishment. And then places of work are directly related to what we're here on this earth to do.
Yeah.
It always, depends on the context of the dream. Yep. Sometimes it's about, shifting patterns. Sometimes it's about being stuck in a loop.
Yes.
Yeah. You're like endlessly, roaming the halls and not really getting anywhere. And then like with the different levels or floors, they represent our different areas of consciousness. So the higher the floor or level in the building, the higher the consciousness you're working in. Like the attic would be our higher consciousness, whereas the basement would be like our subconscious.
Very cool. Well, Jess, when you're talking about impeccability, you say shamans cultivate impeccability.
Mm-hmm.
And over lifetimes, this self-cultivation contributed to our rise to the ranks of shaman as we continue to do our self-work to be responsible. Word response hyphen able, mindful, practice spiritual protocols, and honor ethical boundaries. We continue to level up. So what does that mean to you to be responsible?
Okay, so to be response-able is to really know ourselves, to be in tune with what we're feeling, as well as to be, observant around us, and to behave very consciously, intentionally, and deliberately, rather than having like knee-jerk reactions to things. And so we, as response-able shamans, light workers, and so on, make it a point to take each figurative step or action on purpose and in a planned and balanced way.
Really wonderful. You have to kind of deal with your own issues in order to get there, because if you're going to avoid a knee-jerk reaction, you're avoiding getting triggered, as you say, and that means dealing with things, and things that might be a bit buried even, but they come up occasionally. And you're pointing out that you say, I'd like to make clear that big emotions are okay. We don't need to characterize them as being bad or negative. I feel big emotions are important teachers for us. They show us areas that await healing or require other types of attention, which is so great, because without trying to criticize any of the teachers I've met out there, or shamans or what have you, I have found some people who are really well known, and it's clear in my interactions with them sometimes, or seeing comments they make, not just to me but to other people, say on social media, they've got some big unhealed stuff going on. And I'm not pointing a finger because I'm still healing myself, but something awful is when we take this sort of new age or medicine person or shamanic or druidic spirituality and say, okay, you have to be perfect, you have to be happy or pleasant or calm and peaceful all the time. And if you have an intense day where you're just crying or getting angry, oh, well then you've fallen below the standard. And what you're saying is, this is all a process. We're all still healing.
Oh, yes.
That's how I'm taking it.
Yeah, it's just, part of our human experience here on Earth. We're here to explore all the tastes, all the sights, the sounds, and so on, and also all the feelings.
It's so bizarre. I think that just comes from, we inherited that from organized religion, that you're not supposed to have heavy emotions, because then you're far from God if you have those intense emotions. And how bloody ridiculous, as if we're going to shock God with something. I used to say this to Christians. You say, you're not going to surprise the divine any, okay? Just stop trying to force yourself to be perfect, because that's not going to happen. And then I have to say it to myself as well. And yet, you're also talking, on the other hand, you're talking about holding an internal locus of control, taking active charge of ourselves. So where does that come in, or how do you see us doing that?
All right, so we do that a lot through, in my experience at least, through mindfulness. So learning a bit of detachment to kind of watch and observe ourselves without judging everything all the time, and also to kind of watch and observe, around us without necessarily judging it all the time. And so I feel that when we start developing this mindfulness and practicing it more, it's much easier to be more in control and in charge of ourselves, our emotions, and better able to respond in a heart-centered manner.
So we're talking about balance, really, creating
yes.
balance. Yeah. Have you felt like you just had to go through a time in your life where you released what you learned? Were you raised in the church? That's something I wanted to ask you.
No, I was baptized, and I think I went to a few classes at the church as a kid about religion, and none of it stuck. And so I was kind of in a position to develop my own belief systems, and which is really weird because when I was just 11 years old, I really wanted to be a nun.
Wow.
There was something about needing that spiritual connection that I didn't have at that time. And then in high school, I started to kind of get into Christianity. Some of my friends were involved in their respective churches and stuff. And so there weren't a lot of religious varieties. It was just all different flavors of Christianity there. And so I felt like that's kind of what I had to choose from till I got to college. But by the time I met my pagan friends, I was already, disillusioned with the Bible. I was trying to read 2 different Bibles and couldn't figure out how they were getting that this story was that lesson. I just, I was, a straight A student, and I couldn't figure that out, where they got that from the story. And then just seeing how certain Christians were behaving and trying to propagate their religious beliefs, that just didn't resonate with me. And so it was pretty easy for me to put that aside and pick up paganism.
Yeah, there is so much that's illogical about Christianity unless you're raised in it and indoctrinated at an early age. And then it's kind of hard to question it because you were indoctrinated at such a young age. And what passes for logic amongst, for instance, I was raised in the very right-wing conservative evangelical movement, which unfortunately is trying to take over our government. The reason that you are trying to convince other people that they have to also worship Jesus just as you do and see him just as you do is that you're afraid for them. And you're not doing your job if you're a Christian, if you're not proselytizing, and you're not really loving someone enough if you're not trying to get them to believe the way you believe, which is bizarre when you think about it. Absolutely bizarre. But paganism, they don't proselytize. They don't go out and try to recruit people, do they? It's just sort of...
Not really, no. A lot of us are actually in the broom closet. And sometimes I found that in college, I would be wearing my pentacle, and people would ask me if I was Jewish, and I could tell they were looking at my star. But I could also tell that it wasn't clicking, that it was 5 points instead of 6.
Yes, yeah. That is a little odd that they didn't notice, but maybe they just hadn't seen too many religious symbols. And what did you say? Did you say, no, I'm pagan?
I did, yeah.
Something I love that you put in the book is that you say physical course of action is just as important as spiritual action. So we're taking care of our financial health as well as our spiritual well-being. We're taking care of our relationships as well as our spiritual and emotional well-being and our physical bodies, etc. I love that because I find most people don't really have that balance, and it creates its own issues. And it's hard to listen to
Indeed.
somebody, you know, if they only have one half of the equation full. It's hard to listen to them and agree with them that their way is the superior way. Yeah. Jess, your site is bluestargaia.com. On social media, are you Facebook?
Blue Star Gaia.
Facebook, Blue Star Gaia, Instagram also, YouTube also. Wonderful. You can sign up for Jess's newsletter.
Correct.
And, you know, again, Jessica does Reiki healing, intuitive phone readings, remote energy clearings. Everybody needs those. Everybody needs energy clearings. Absolutely. Do you do it by phone or by Zoom call, or how do you do it, Jess?
For the Reiki, what I do is the client and I set a time and date, and all they need to do is just be in a safe place of receivership. So preferably not operating like a car or anything like that.
Right.
And then no phone or Zoom involved. I just send the Reiki, and then whatever information comes through, I call it the report. I type it up in an email and send it to them.
Oh, wonderful. Well, Jess, thank you so much for being here. Absolutely.
Oh,
wonderful.
thank you for inviting me.
Oh, it's great fun to have you, and I hope you'll come back. And again, it's bluestargaia.com. Go to services, and really very, very reasonably priced Reiki healing, long distance, intuitive phone readings, remote energy clearings, and dream interpretation. And those are the sessions that Jess does. And then she also offers rites of passage ceremonies. So all that's on your website. Thank you so much for being here. Please come back at some point, Jess.
Oh, I would love to. It would be an honor. Thank you for having me. It was fun.
Oh, thank you so much, and many blessings to our listeners. Namaste.